At the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse, General John Sedgwick stood before his men as Confederate marksmen tried their best from the woods nearly 1,000 yards away. He was one of the most beloved officers in the Union Army, steady, respected, and calm under fire. As volleys whizzed past, his soldiers instinctively ducked. Sedgwick laughed. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. Seconds later, he became one of the most famous casualties of the war. A single shot struck him just below the left eye. The force shattered his cheekbone and exited behind his ear. Witnesses said he looked surprised, with a faint smile, and then collapsed silently. For a moment, his men froze. No one could believe what they'd seen. Then a hush spread through the line, the sound of war replaced by disbelief. Sedgwick's passing was nearly instantaneous, and to be fair, likely not all that painful. I mean, he was smiling at the end. But that was just a teaser. These next ones were truly painful. We're just getting started. At the Battle of Shiloh, General Albert Sidney Johnston led the Confederate Army's assault through the Tennessee woods. He rode at the front, directing troops under heavy fire, when he was struck just below the right knee. Witnesses said he barely reacted. He reassured his staff that it was a mere scratch, tied a handkerchief around his leg, and continued issuing orders. No one realized it had severed an artery. Within minutes, the wound began to fill his boot. His aide, Governor Isham Harris of Tennessee, noticed the general swaying in the saddle. Johnston's face turned pale, his voice weakening mid-command. When Harris reached him, the general tried to speak, but couldn't form words. The tourniquet that could have saved him was still in his pocket, untouched. His aides carried him from his horse and laid him under a small tree. They tore open his boot, and it all poured out onto the grass. Surgeons later described Johnston's pulse as nearly gone, his breathing shallow, and his skin cold from his injuries. He remained conscious for several minutes, aware of what was happening, then slipped into silence. He perished less than an hour after being hit. The men around him realized too late that they had lost the highest-ranking officer on either side to fall in the entire war. Big shoes to fill. The Battle of Antietam left more than 23,000 casualties scattered across the Maryland countryside. Among the wounded brought to the makeshift hospitals near Sharpsburg was a Union soldier struck in the head by shell fragments. The wound tore away part of his scalp and skull, leaving his brain visibly pulsating through the fracture. He was still conscious when surgeons examined him. He tried to speak, but could only produce guttural sounds, his hands trembling as he reached toward his own wound. The soldier was placed on a cot in a farmhouse near the Rolette farm, where nurses cleaned the wound with water from a nearby creek. Within a day, the area around the injury had turned red and swollen. A thick discharge began to seep from the opening. Throughout the night, attendants noted his restlessness. He groaned continuously, sometimes thrashing until he was restrained. As pressure on the brain increased, he lost coordination, then consciousness. By the second day, convulsions set in, and by sunrise, he was gone. He was never identified by name, only by the nature of his injury. At Camp Sumter, better known as Andersonville, more than 45,000 Union soldiers were confined between February 1864 and May 1865. Nearly 1,300 lost their lives there. The camp, built for 10,000, became a swamp of disease and starvation as thousands more arrived each month. Its only water source, a shallow stream running through the center, was fouled by human waste from prisoners and guards alike. Union Sergeant John L. Ransom, who kept a detailed diary while imprisoned there, recorded the daily passings of men from scurvy, dysentery, and gangrene. He described soldiers whose legs and feet swelled until the skin split open, their gums bleeding from vitamin deficiency, and bodies so wasted that the bones seemed ready to come through. Ransom wrote that the sick lay in the mud, too weak to rise, and that wagons carried corpses out each morning for burial in long trenches beyond the stockade. Among the hundreds Ransom mentioned but did not name was one he watched die of scurvy and diarrhea after days without food. He noted that such men often passed quietly, their bodies so wasted there was little left to resist. The sentiment captured what life had become inside Andersonville by midsummer 1864. Men reduced to silence and exhaustion, waiting for life's end in heat and filth. On the night of May 2, 1863, Confederate Commander Thomas Stonewall Jackson rode ahead of his lines after his troops had shattered the Union flank at Chancellorsville. In the darkness, his own men mistook his returning party for Union cavalry and opened fire. 3 rounds struck him, 2 in the left arm and 1 in the right hand. He was carried from his horse, pale but calm, and told his surgeon, Dr. Hunter McGuire, "You must make haste." McGuire amputated the shattered arm at the shoulder under chloroform. At first, Jackson seemed to recover, even appearing optimistic about his recovery. But by the 5th day, he developed pneumonia, likely exasperated by shock, blood loss, and exposure during transport. His temperature climbed. His breathing became labored. McGuire noted the extreme pain in the chest and Jackson's difficulty drawing air. He drifted in and out of delirium, murmuring orders as though still directing his corps. By May 10th, his lungs were filling with liquid. McGuire recorded his pulse as rapid and thready, his face gray and his body trembling with each breath. Jackson asked those beside him to let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. Minutes later, he exhaled softly and was still. In April 1865, the Civil War was nearing its end, with major Confederate surrenders signaling the collapse of resistance. Thousands of Union soldiers, most of them recently freed from Confederate prisons, boarded the Sultana, a Mississippi River steamboat meant to carry 376 passengers. Instead, it held more than 2,100. The men were thin, sick, and eager to go home. They filled every deck, singing and cheering as the ship pulled away from Vicksburg. No one knew they were standing on a time bomb. Just after 2 a.m. on April 27th, the Sultana's boilers, poorly repaired and dangerously overpressured, exploded. The blast tore through the decks, sending fire, steam, and shrapnel in every direction. Men sleeping near the boilers were instantly incinerated. Others woke up screaming, their clothes aflame. Survivors recalled the air filling with burning embers and the sound of hundreds of voices crying for help in the dark. Those who jumped into the river found no safety. The river's chill finished what the explosion began, as most were too weak from starvation to swim. Some clung to floating wreckage until their hands gave out. Others sank beneath the surface, still calling out for their comrades. Witnesses along the shore described the river illuminated by the fire of the burning wreckage that drifted downstream for miles. By morning, the Sultana was gone, reduced to twisted metal and ash. Around 1,800 people perished, making it the worst maritime disaster in American history, though news of it was overshadowed by Lincoln's assassination just 2 weeks earlier. Sadly, there was a cruel irony for these Union soldiers who, after surviving prison camps and battlefields, met their end not in war, but on a homecoming ship that became their final coffin. Henry Wirz, a Swiss-born Confederate officer, became infamous as the commandant of Camp Sumter, better known as Andersonville Prison, as mentioned earlier, where nearly 13,000 Union prisoners lost their lives under appalling conditions. After the war, he was arrested, tried by a military commission in Washington, D.C., and found guilty of conspiracy and murder connected to the treatment of prisoners. On the morning of November 10, 1865, Wirz was led to the gallows in the yard of the old Capitol prison. Soldiers stood guard while hundreds of spectators, including reporters and veterans, gathered to watch. Before the hood was lowered over his head, Wirz reportedly declared he was innocent and a martyr, punished for simply following orders. Regardless, the noose was adjusted, and at 10:32 a.m., the trap door dropped. Witnesses reported that the rope failed to snap the neck cleanly. His body convulsed, his chest heaved, and his legs twitched. For several minutes, he remained alive, gasping for air while the crowd shouted, "Remember Andersonville!" When the movements finally ceased, the executioner cut the rope and the doctors pronounced him deceased. The Civil War gave America a truly painful experience all around for both the country and the soldiers involved. What do you think? What was the worst? Leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.